Welcome to week 1 of Financial Health and Wellbeing. This week we're going to be covering a lot of things, including the interconnectedness between mental health and financial wellbeing. We're going to look at values and beliefs and how that affects our financial wellbeing. And we're also going to set some intentions about what you'd like to see accomplished by the end of this course. So just a couple of notes for you. I will be referring to my notes at different times. It's a little bit like an airline pilot. You know, if he's been up there 50,000 times, he still has his checklist and he's still going to refer to his notes. So I think that's a really, really important thing to remind you of. And also, there will be a lot of questions that come up for you over this course. Please bear in mind that I'm pretty sure everything that you could possibly come up with will be covered. So make a little note if you want to, but I dare say the following week, whatever it was that came up for you, will be covered. What does financial wellbeing mean for you? There's a couple of exercises here in your workbook that I'd like you to have a look at. First of all, I'd like you to write your thoughts on financial wellbeing and what it actually does mean to you. The second exercise is take a moment to close your eyes and imagine that it's the future and you now have wonderful financial health and you've built a wonderful lifestyle on good finances and security, and it's genuinely yours. So close your eyes and have a think and have a feel of what that's like. How does it feel? First of all, financial wellbeing. What is it? Well, it's a lot of things to a lot of people, but really financial wellbeing is about security. It's about feeling safe. It's about going out and getting something if you need it or if you want it without having to worry within your means. It's being able to sleep well at night. It's being able to live a life that you can enjoy and feel good about, where you don't have worry about how you're going to pay the next bill, where you actually can build for a future. There's different people that I've met in my life some have had good financial wellbeing and some have really struggled. Why is it that somebody can earn $60,000 and have really good financial wellbeing, and yet another person who I know earns $400,000 and every month comes up $10,000 short? Why is it that there's somebody else who I know who used to work, a very successful salesperson, he earned 6 times what the receptionist did, and yet he was always going up to the receptionist and saying, can you just spot me $50 or $20 or whatever it was here and there? He had a wonderful life. He drank, he smoked, he made wonderful sales, he went, lavishly out to fancy restaurants, drove a wonderful fancy car, etc., etc. And yes, he was earning a lot of money, but it was all a lie. His financial health was appalling. So just because somebody earns a lot of money doesn't mean that they're financially healthy. So we're going to have a little look as to why that might be. Let's look at a few statistics first. I'm going to read some statistics on mental health due to financial stress. 1. People experiencing financial challenges are at least twice as likely to encounter mental health issues than those who aren't, and vice versa. 2. A Beyond Blue survey found that 1 in 3 respondents said cost of living pressures had negatively impacted their mental health, either quite a bit or an extreme amount over the previous 12 months. 3. Among young Australians aged 15 to 19, 55% are concerned about financial security, and those who reported financial hardships or concerns were twice as likely to report living with mental health conditions compared to those who did not. 4. Financial stress levels in Australia are at the highest point in 10 years, with only 1 in 3 working Australians indicating that they were financially secure in 2024, down from half in 2020. 5. In November 2024, Lifeline's Financial Stress Toolkit webpage had almost twice the number of views compared to November 2023. And sadly, those numbers are quite possibly worse than that, because most people actually are silent about their finances. Let's have a look at the link between mental and financial health, because they do go hand in hand. Financial wellbeing does significantly contribute to the overall life satisfaction and mental health. There's an individual I know, a young person, who had some personal issues and was trying to work through them, etc., and had actually started kicking some goals and really getting ahead in life, and seemed to be doing really, really well, was having some savings and had a good relationship, and work was great and things were going along really, really nicely. Then they were planning for a big event, and this was going to cost a lot of money. So they really, at the end of the day, overcommitted for this event. And they were trying to save for an event. They were still trying to save for their future. And all of a sudden, things started getting too hard. And as a result of this young person became very anxious, then started becoming depressed. They were stressed. Within a couple of years, there was suicidal thoughts. It was really dire. So, as far as your mental health and financial situation goes, they're very, very much interlinked. And we need to understand why these things happen. And we will go further into this in a little while. But let's have a little look at some of the traits of mental and financial health. Good financial health. Let me read for you some points. Maintaining an emergency fund covering 3 to 6 months of living expenses. And here we say 3 to 6 months, but as you get really good with your financial health, which you will when you follow this program, really 1 year is the ideal amount that you want to have as a backup for yourself of living expenses. But let's just look at 3 to 6 months. That's a great start. Feeling empowered and confident to make financial decisions is good financial health. Having a steady source of income. Regularly reviewing financial statements, expenses and investments, and we will go further into all these points. Setting short-term and long-term financial goals. Paying bills on time and managing debt effectively. Being able to enjoy life without constant financial stress. Poor financial health. Poor diet, maybe even poor hygiene. Poor sleep, calls from debt collectors, overdue bills, living paycheck to paycheck, numerous applications for short-term finance, excessive withdrawals at gambling venues, constant arguing, guilt over spending on essential or non-essential items. And I can actually say that I've seen that in my life. I don't know anyone who hasn't seen any of those poor traits. Well, let's have a look at the significance of financial well-being. There's an individual I know who, in his younger years, went through some struggles, got married, before you know it, he's divorced, went through another marriage, before you know it, he's divorced again. Wasn't quite landing things the way he wanted. He was, starting up business. He had a lot of pressure. And then he decided to get really strict with himself and start sticking to some certain disciplines around his finances. And it didn't happen overnight, but gradually, things turned around for him. And he became a more attractive person. As he was more attractive in himself, he actually started attracting more attractive people around him, including a third wife. So from there was less stress, there was more focus on the business. He was generally, good, healthy, physically, mentally, good well-being, and his business had some wonderful success and went on and influenced a lot of people in a really great way. So it really is very important in how it can significantly influence you. Money psychology. Have a listen to what Brené Brown says. You either walk inside your story and own it, or you stand outside your story and hustle for your worthiness. So let's have a look at what your money story is. What are your relationships like? What's your relationship like specifically with money? Think, feel, behave. How do you think about money? How do you feel about money? How do you behave with money? What's your narrative? What's going on with your self-talk all the time? What's that inner little thing saying to you? Or when you're speaking to other people about money, what sort of things come out of your mouth when you talk about money and your monetary situation? Mantras. What deep down are the mantras that are deep down in our subconscious? What's the philosophy that we live by when it comes to what we think about money? So we're looking at the psychology, which is made up of beliefs, values and habits, which is how we think, feel and behave. So let's look at our money story. Stories that don't serve us, how we think. I remember a salesperson we had many years ago, and this particular person, lovely chap, had a real battler mentality. He'd been brought up in a household which, it's not that people didn't love each other, but there was a lot of struggle around money and income and finances all the time. And, everyone seemed to be sick and having ailments and, always off to the doctor. And he grew up like this. And he lived into the talk that was around his home life. And, he used to see himself as a bit of a battler and, well, what do you expect? And that's the way I was brought up. He had battling with 6 cats and 4 dogs to have to feed and look after as well as himself, yet finances were low. I know it's hard enough to look after yourself when finances are low. He had a hobby of collecting guns. How do you do this when finances are low? He just couldn't afford to do other things. He felt stuck and he felt like life was hopeless. But this was his self-talk. This was the mantra that he lived by. And, he could have done more, but he didn't know how to change it for himself at this point. And I know people don't like to hear this, but really wealth is a state of mind. I am where I am because of my state of mind. You are where you are because of your state of mind. And we need to take responsibility for that. Your perception about money is as unique as your fingerprint. We had another salesperson who worked for us. He came to us as a young person. He had $10,000 debt. He was 21. Now, this was of real concern for him because he'd grown up with parents where they'd been in business, they'd lost a lot of money, and he was a teenager, and it put a huge amount of pressure on the family household. Things were not happy at home, and he didn't like that feeling. And so when he had this $10,000 debt at 21, he really had the courage enough to look at that and ask himself, do I want to keep going down this road because I know this feeling and I don't like it. It reminds me of how I grew up. He wanted to change some things. So he made a decision, but that took courage. He had to dig deep, be honest, and not filter out any questions, any answers. He needed to really be honest with himself. And as I said before, not everyone is that honest with themselves because it's confronting. Listen to 7 key questions to unlock your money script. And I'd like you to answer these questions in your workbook. Number 1, what was it like financially growing up in your family? For example, did your parents complain about never having enough? Or was there an abundance of money? Did they fight over their finances or did they never speak about it? Were you financially comfortable or did you go without? 2, what are the 3 things you learned about money from your mother? 4, what are 3 things you learnt about money from your father? And if you didn't grow up with a mother or father, from the carers that you grew up with. 4, what is the earliest memory about money? Think school savings, money boxes, gifts, money found in the sofa even. Now think about the emotions that you feel around these memories. Were they positive or negative? What did they tell you about yourself or take away from this event or experience? Number 5, what emotions did your family associate with money? Were they similar for both of your parents or were they conflicting? How do you think their behaviours have shaped your financial patterns today? Thinking about Damien. What do you believe about wealthy people? What evidence from your childhood do you have to support this belief? 7, did your family or someone close to you experience a significant financial event during your early years? It was maybe a job loss or an illness causing a parent to not be able to work, loss of a home or finance, a business or a significant financial windfall, or overwhelming debts rather. How did you and your family navigate this event? Describe the emotions coming up for you when you're reflecting on this time of your life. Let's look at reinventing a new money story. Childhood perceptions, the beliefs that we've grown up with. Do you now see how some of those might have influenced the way you've been with money? What new behaviours do you think you need to adopt that are different? What old behaviours do you need to change? Or maybe there's some things that you need to learn to help you and support you in those changes. What do you want the new money story to look like? Some people go through life with money as that they're a slave to money, that they're always on this treadmill making money, trying to earn money, as opposed to getting to a point where you can actually make money work for you. You're not a slave to it anymore. Write down all the things in life you're financially grateful for. Gratitude's so important on this journey, in all areas of life, no different in this financial area. What do you have? What do you earn at the moment? I mean, you may say, I'm not earning very much. I don't like my job. Let me remind you, there are people out there who don't have a job. And if you are somebody that doesn't have a job, then what do you have? Maybe you have some loved ones there in the background. Maybe you have some security at the moment. You're living somewhere where at least you're sheltered. We always have something to be grateful for. But sometimes we just need to sit down and really question that for ourselves and remind ourselves. Now there's a quiz for you to do in your exercise workbook, and you need to do this quiz just to have a look at your attitude towards money. It will really help you understand a few things, and there's some answers and questions in there for you to have a look at. Now let's uncover values, priorities over finances. What do you prioritise over your finances? It might be pets are really, really important to you more so than money. I don't care what it costs. I want the cat to have the surgery. I know that sounds awful, but I think you know what I'm saying. Holidays, time with family. I know we can't afford it, but I really need this time with the family. It's really important. It's something I'm not going to compromise on. What are your priorities? What do you prioritise over money? What do you value the most? Now, once upon a time, I valued, having, a flash car and, all sorts of fancy clothes. These days, I value my health more. So, our values can change, but what are you valuing now? Maybe you are thinking that you're still valuing things that you valued 10 years ago. Maybe you need to reevaluate. What are your values today? What is most important to you today? Experiences. Let's look at how experiences too have shaped your values. I know my partner, Jim, and I'll speak about Jim a couple of times. When he was a young boy, his father was a motor mechanic, had his own service station, and he always saw his father's hands, weathered with, sort of that greasy, they were clean, but, they were stained. But he always had a roll of cash in his pocket. And it was not uncommon on the weekends for them to have a day trip as a family. They'd get in the car and they'd go to Phillip Island for the day or the Peninsula. And in those days too, it wasn't unusual to see roadside handmade furniture, beautiful, all sorts of, furniture for the home, roadside, bespoke type things being sold. And, he'd pull over, and if he felt like it, he might be, actually, I really like those chairs. Yeah, I'd like 6 of those chairs. Here's my address, let's organise for that. Here's some money, out would come the cash out of the roll. He wasn't big noting, and a lot of the time he didn't get the roll out. But the fact is he had choices, and he could. And, then they'd get to their destination and maybe grab a couple of crayfish and some chips and go sit on the beach. Because he could. And it was nice and it made them feel good. Now, that has had made a huge impression on Jim. And he went away from that experience as a child, growing up into adulthood, thinking, if I work hard like Dad, I can enjoy life and always have money to enjoy things that I want to when I want to within my means. What if you had unlimited resources? Let's just have a little dream for a moment. Have a think about it. What if you did have unlimited resources? It requires a mind shift to go from A to B, to go from maybe not working finances as well in your life to having good, healthy financial well-being. There was a young man who worked for us once, and he had a life where a wonderful childhood, but it was parents laboured, did manual labour, and things were always hand to mouth, loving, all the rest of it. But there was never excess, there was never extra left over. And he decided that he wanted to have extra. So he thought that when he looked at salespeople, they all seemed to be doing well in their flashy cars. So he thought, instead of doing the manual labour that he'd been doing as a young adult, he'd become a salesperson and make his money. So he knew that he needed to have a mind shift to do this. And he worked on his values and his beliefs and so forth. And he actually he was working with us and working through these things. And he had a wonderful shift. He'd read books on this. There's a wonderful book for you called Failing Forward by John C. Maxwell. It's all about failing forward in life, but getting better at what it is that you're wanting to do. And he found that gradually he went from a low 5-figure income to a high 5-figure income. And he worked really, really hard and wanted to get to that 6-figure income. And just as he was tipping into that 6-figure income, and he did get there, and he really enjoyed it, he slipped back. It's like his values were not congruent with his plan. He had the plan in place that he wanted to execute, but the deep set values that he had, even though he'd worked on values and beliefs, there was more work that he should have done. And he couldn't stick to the plan that he had put in place. So it all just imploded, unfortunately for him. So you need everything to be aligned, and you need to execute it and stick with it. Otherwise, all the hard work in the world's not going to get you there. We need to be setting financial goals. So how do we set financial goals? We need to have SMART goals. We need short and long-term goals. And we need to know how to prioritise things in our life to execute those goals. So what are SMART goals, you might ask? SMART goals it's an acronym. So we've got specific, firstly. So we need, whatever the goal is, to be very specific. It can't be wishy-washy. It can't be, I want to buy a car. What car do you want? What year? What model? What colour? Let's get it down. You can take a picture of it and have it there for you to look at. Be specific about your goals. The more specific that you are, the more likely you are to achieve it. It needs to be measurable. You need to be able to measure it and so that it can progress. It needs to be achievable. If there's no way on earth that you're going to be able to achieve this goal in this period, guess what? You know it deep down you're not going to achieve it, and you won't. It does need to be achievable. You can't say to yourself that you want to, have something that might take 10 years for you to achieve in 1 year. So it must be achievable. It needs to be relevant. What are your values? And this is why we keep coming back to things like beliefs and values, because they underpin everything. So it must be relevant to your values. And it needs to be time-bound. It needs an end date. So you can't say in about a year. You need to say, I want it by June or, the 30th of December next year or this year or whatever it is, but give it an actual date. Short and long-term goals, what's the difference? Short-term goals are little goals to help you keep life good as you're moving towards your long-term goal. So a short-term goal might be, a night in the city with your partner or with some friends, go see the movie, go to a nice restaurant. That's a nice short-term goal. And that is going to make life a little bit better for you as you're striving towards your long-term goal, which might be the house, the car, something big, usually scary. Now, we also need to have priority with our goals. We need to understand what the difference is between urgent and important. Now, things do come up and they become urgent and it's out of our hands. I get that. But a lot of the time, if we take care of what's important when we're meant to do it, how we're meant to do it, usually that doesn't become urgent. So that's why it's really, really important to make sure that we are sticking to a plan. When we stick to our plan, usually things tick along quite nicely. Let's create your goals. Short, medium and long. And yes, there's medium. Between the short and the long, there's a medium. So the medium might be a week away in Queensland with the family or with your mates or your girlfriends. And again, that's just a nice little thing to keep you ticking along. The long goals can be big and scary, and they should be big and scary. And there's a really, really good author called Brian Tracy who does some wonderful books on goal setting. And I'd really recommend that you have a look at some of his audios or books online. And he'll talk to you a lot about dreaming and planning and then taking the right action, which is just going to be a wonderful follow-up for this program. Do you know, Jim wrote some goals down once, and he was going through some papers 2 years later, and sure enough, he found this bit of paper that he'd written these goals down on. And guess what? 2 years later, he realised he had achieved 80% of what was on that bit of paper. It really is very powerful when you write goals down. And I do recommend to write them down rather than just, audio them or even typing them. If you write it, there's an actual very real thing scientifically that they've found that it's like the wiring in our brain. When you take the pen or the pencil and you write, it's like it hardwires you. And then every time when you then read over your own handwriting, it's like it sparks that wiring, and it just makes it stronger and stronger and stronger in your mind. So what we need to do is we need to now have a think about what we want to achieve with this program. And I want you to have a think now as we're finishing this week's program about what it is that you want to achieve for the program. I want you to set your intentions, what you'd like to go away with after this program. So next week we're going to be speaking about emotions and spending. We're going to be speaking about financial stress, but we're also going to talk about the coping mechanisms, so it's all good. So have a think about any questions you have a look at the pre-work before next week, And thank you so much for joining us. And remember, it all starts with you.